Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing really well. So today I am back to talk about some of the books that I have purchased most recently. Recently I've decided that every time I buy like 10 or more books over the space of a few weeks or a few months, that I should pop in and let you know what I've been buying. Hold myself accountable. And here we are already, showing you the books, doing a book haul. I need help. This is everything I've bought since I think the beginning of July. So yeah, let's just crack on and get into the books. The first one I have to show you about today is one that I actually bought in London. I was actually in London for an event. If you follow publishing at all, if you read the bookseller at all, slight humble brag, but I was actually nominated as a bookseller rising star, which was really, really cool. And as part of that, I actually got to go to an event that the bookseller were doing in London just to celebrate everybody who was on that rising star list. And of course, you know, I do a trip to London, I obviously have to go to Foyles. And so whilst I was there, I picked up Breaking Into Song, Why You Shouldn't Hate Musicals by Adam Lenson. Now with a title like that, you're probably thinking, Charlotte, isn't this book just preaching to the converted? And yes, this is true. You will probably know that I'm a massive, massive fan of musical theatre. I'm a member of a musical theatre society. I like to do shows, but I saw this in Foyles and I was just like, I couldn't leave it. It's one that I had seen before, but I've never seen in person. And as somebody who did write her dissertation on musicals, particularly history musicals, I was really interested in seeing like this new text about musical theatre, about the importance of musical theatre. One of the things that when I was writing my dissertation supervisor was really keen for me to pick apart and to really emphasise is why I was talking about musicals in the first place and what do musicals have to offer. And I do kind of wish that I had this book to be able to point to and be like, this is what musicals offer. And then from the back, people rarely say they hate books or television or films, but they often say they hate musicals. Moreover, everyone seems to have a fixed idea of exactly what a musical is, what it sounds like, looks like, or is about. Why is the collision and integration of music, song, and storytelling so polarizing? And why have we allowed a form so full of possibility to become so repetitive and restrictive? Through a series of essays, Breaking Into Song asks what audiences can do to stay open-minded and what creatives can do to make new musicals better. Examining both sides of the divide, Adam Lenson asks how those who both love and hate musicals can further expand the possibilities of this widely misunderstood medium. And that's definitely a sentiment I think is really true. Like, musical theatre, it's a whole different medium of telling a story, and there are so many different ways to do it. So why is it that people are so quick to say, oh yeah, I hate musicals, I hate all musical theatre? And it's like, well, have you seen all musicals? No, you haven't. So how can you possibly say, like, basically a lot of what he's saying in here I really agree with, because if someone just saw a handful of films, didn't like them, and then said, oh, I hate all film, you'd be like, well, that's ridiculous, you clearly haven't seen everything there is to offer, you just haven't seen the right film. So I feel like I'm going to be nodding along to a lot of things in here. Next up, a book that has already popped up on the channel is Bargain Bin RomCom by Leena. This is one that I actually pre-ordered from the publisher and pretty much gobbled this up straight away. This is Leena poetry, her first poetry collection, and it's absolutely brilliant, fantastic. I talk about this more in my July wrap-up, so definitely check that out. Next up, you'll have seen in my previous haul video that I bought 2 of the books in the 6 Tudor Queen series by Alison Weir, and I'd mentioned that I had 1 more to buy until I had the full set, and wouldn't you know it, I did pick it up, didn't I? The last one that I had to get was book number 5, which is all about the life of Katheryn Howard, who, if you know the rhyme, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, you may be able to guess what happens to poor Katheryn Howard in this book and what her fate was with Henry VIII. Especially having, I think in 2020, I read Young and Damned and Fair by Gareth Russell, which was a very sympathetic portrayal of Katheryn Howard's life. I'm really keen to read this and see what Alison Weir's take is on Katheryn. I feel like with The Six Wives, she's a very polarising character, and I feel like opinion is starting to sway more in favour of her and really highlighting like what a precarious position she was in. Not to say that there was nothing that she did wrong, but you know, she was at most 18, 19, probably more 15, 16 years old, married to a man who was 49, 50. I don't know how I would have handled myself in that situation, but probably not well. And yeah, I'm just really keen to see what she has to say about her. Next up on the history train, we are going into history non-fiction and picking up one of my most anticipated reads of the year, which is Femina, a new history of the Middle Ages through the women written out of it by Janina Ramirez. This basically does what the title suggests. We are looking at the history of the medieval period through the lives of women, and particularly women who have often not gotten their due in the historical record. This is one that I have already read and I think is absolutely fantastic. I know so many people who are looking forward to reading this book who have similar taste to me, and yeah, if this sounds like it's something that appeals to you, then absolutely read it. I think when we get to next March, if myself and Brittany over at Literarily Smitten are doing our Women in History read along, then this is definitely going to be one of the books that I recommend because it is so fantastic. Look at this cover. Oh. Another hardback history that I bought, it was an expensive day when I bought these two books, is Two Houses, Two Kingdoms, A History of France and England from 1100 to 1300 by Katheryn Hanley. Now, you may recall the name Katheryn Hanley because Katheryn Hanley wrote one of my favourite historical books of all time, which is Matilda, Empress Queen Warrior. And so when I found out that she had a new history book out, even though I don't believe that this really delves into Matilda, though it may, Empress Matilda does certainly feature in this time period, I had to pick it up. I had to see what it was about. I'd also heard her, I think, on BBC History's podcast talking about this book, and it just sounded so intriguing. Just talking about this 200-year period and the relationship that France and England had to each other and the many ups and downs in that. I think there's often this preconception that France and England were constantly at each other's throats, but I think from hearing what she said about this book, that wasn't always the case, and it's very dependent on the personalities of the monarchs and their families. We know that I love a history of kings and queens, so had to read this one. Next up, taking a slightly different tact, I have the fourth book in the Bridgerton series, which is Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, and this is Penelope and Colin's romance. If you have been following my videos, you may have noticed that I have skipped right from book 2 to book 4, because, you know, if Netflix can do it, why can't I? I'm sorry, I just don't really know how much I care about Benedict. I'll go back to it, I swear. But especially because, like, the production trailers have come out for Bridgerton Series 3, and Bridgerton Series 3 are focusing on book 4 instead. It made me really keen to pick this up and to see what everybody was talking about. Previously, I've read book 1 and book 2, and I quite liked book 1 aside from that scene, and I really loved book 2. I thought it was leaps and bounds better, and I think I would put Romancing Mr. Bridgerton pretty much on the same level. I really enjoyed this. It's really cute, and I am looking forward to seeing what Bridgerton, the Netflix series, does with this book. I know that they are not always completely faithful to the original source material, so it's interesting to see what they're going to keep and what they're going to change. Next up, two books that are slightly different for me. Maybe not if you know me as a person, but in terms of my reading, a bit different. Something that I've been having a conversation with some of my friends about recently is that, especially since 2020, since the pandemic, how much my interest and engagement in, like, beauty, hair, skincare, makeup has really gone down. Like, obviously you can tell I am wearing a full face of makeup today, and I am pretty regimented with, like, a skincare routine, with putting a face on, but especially prior to 2020 and especially during university, that was something that was a real passion of mine. I had towering stacks of, like, Muji storage that was just full of makeup. I wanted to try new stuff out all the time, as much as my budget would allow for it, and that's not really something I'm as engaged with anymore. I used to follow, like, hundreds of different beauty and makeup people on YouTube and on Instagram, and that's just not something that I do anymore. And I wasn't sure how much of that was, like, my natural inclination, how much of it was because of the pandemic and because, like, we were staying inside all the time and there was no one to, like, go out and show my face of makeup to. You know, like, I definitely still wore makeup during the pandemic, and especially when I was filming, but my engagement with, like, the beauty industry was, like, so much lower than it had been. But I am still engaged in it in terms of, like, my day-to-day activities, my day-to-day rituals of looking after myself, self-care, and I just recently felt like I wasn't doing everything that I could to look after myself and to just feel good about myself. And so when I was in the charity shop, I stumbled across a couple of books that are quite well known within, like, the beauty sphere, but ones that I'd never picked up for myself. And because they were 50p each, I thought, fine, you've been thinking that you need to get back into this for some time, so let's do it. First book that I have is Skincare, The Ultimate No-Nonsense Guide by Caroline Hirons. Caroline Hirons, for those of you who do not know, is, like, the industry guru on skincare. She's known for her very no-nonsense style. I've been following her skincare advice since I was around about 18. I don't think my skin is terrible. You know, I have breakouts, but I think those are normal hormonal breakouts. I think I look fine. But skincare was something that I didn't feel like I'd been putting quite as much attention into as I maybe should. So I'm wanting to go back to basics and read this and just think a bit more about my routine and the products that I'm using, and I think it should be a pretty quick read. I know that there is actually a Skincare 2.0 version of this. This is the original one, I believe, but she did publish a more recent updated one. I think mainly it was updated products, and it was more about skincare since the pandemic and like looking after your skin when you've been wearing a mask all day, things like that. So if I ever come across that in a charity shop, I'll probably pick it up, but I think this will do me for now. And then also one that is a little bit older, but I actually remember when this came out originally, is Pretty Honest by Sali Hughes, the straight talking beauty companion. So once again, both of these very no nonsense guides to skincare and beauty. And I think this goes into more of a full spectrum of beauty, so hair, makeup and body care as well. And yeah, aside from the fact that it is more wide ranging, I don't actually know too much about the contents of this, but I just think these will be really fun to dip in and out of. Maybe not something I'm gonna do a hardcore review of on my channel, but you know, just something that's nice for me to have. And then I actually went home for a couple of weeks. I went back up to Huddersfield to spend a couple of weeks with my family. I was working from home most of the time. I think I took a couple of annual leave days in order to really maximize the time with my family. And I'd said to myself that I wasn't going to buy any books because I didn't have room to buy books. And I was really silly and brought a bunch of hardback books with me and then proceeded to not read them. So really it was in my best interest to not buy any more books. And yet, books were bought. The first book that I picked up was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. And whilst I'm talking about this, I should probably also talk about the second romance book I picked up, which was Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. I picked these up in the works, partially because I really wanted to read them, but also because since I've been home, I have been re-listening to one of my favourite podcasts, which was a discovery from this year, which was the Heaving Bosoms podcast, which is a romance book podcast, which is supremely funny. I love it so very much. And I've basically been going through the entire podcast episode list all over again and enjoying every second of it. And these were two of the books that they had spoken about very highly that I'd wanted to get to for quite some time. So when I saw them in the works for like £3 each, had to snap them up. And you will definitely be seeing both of these in a wrap up very soon. Also, because I was back home, I of course wanted to go to the local independent bookshop in Halifax, which is Book Corner. Every time that I go back home, I always want to pick up a book from there and just support and boost the local economy and boost that bookshop, because you know we don't really have any other bookshops in Halifax, so I want to support the one that we do have. And it's a lovely shop. If you are ever in Halifax, I really recommend that you go. It is in the Peace Hall and it's beautiful. And the book that I stumbled across is one that I've never come across before. It is The Cookbook of Common Prayer by Francesca Haig. And I actually didn't know anything about this book. As I say, I think for one thing, the fact that it is bright orange and has lemons on the cover, that sold me. But then when I read the back of it, it just sounded really lovely and sad and a bit tragic, but also heartwarming at the same time. It's a book about grief, which apparently I seem to read a lot of those. When Jill and Gabe's eldest son drowns overseas, they decide that they must hide the truth from their desperately unwell teenage daughter. But as Jill begins to send letters from her dead son to her sister, the increasingly elaborate lie threatens to prove more dangerous than the truth. A novel about family, food, grief and hope, this gripping lyrical story moves between Tasmania and London, exploring the many ways that a family can break down and the unexpected ways it can be put back together. I picked up the book and I flipped to part 1, which actually isn't where the story begins now that I'm looking at it. And I'd read the first section, which was the police coming to the door of the mother and telling them that her son had died. And because her daughter is so unwell, she's expecting that they're going to tell her that her daughter has died, and instead it is her son. And just the shock of that, you can feel just this visceral pain and shock and heartbreak, this unexpected tragedy. And yeah, it got me, and just that little section alone, that like 1/8 of a scene, was enough to make me want to buy it. And yeah, I hope I get to this really soon. I hope this isn't one that I end up just putting off, because what I've read so far is just beautiful. And do let me know if you've read this, because I hadn't heard anybody talk about it before. And then the last book I'm going to show you today is another one that I picked up in the works. I was not expecting to find this there. Is The History of Magic, From Alchemy to Witchcraft, From the Ice Age to the Present by Chris Gosden. This is a book that first came to my attention because the Summertown Daunt books, the Daunt books that is pretty much on the doorstep of my office, so I'm in there quite a lot, had this as a staff recommendation pick. And I thought it was a really intriguing title and subject matter, despite the fact that, as we know, I am not a fan of a witchy wise woman in my books. And to be honest, I don't really think that much about magic just generally and the history of it. And I thought this would just fill in a lot of gaps in my knowledge about magic, how these superstitions develop, what it says about like our relation to the universe, the relationship between religion and magic, science and magic. It is really interesting, but just something I've not thought about. And yeah, I'm just keen to read this and plug in those gaps. So there we go. Those are all of the books that I have picked up recently. I think it's a bit bit of an eclectic mix. We've got some essays, we've got poetry, non-fiction history, romance, some contemporary sad books about grief. Bit of a mixed bag, but I think all things that I'm interested in. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken about today. Let me know if you're interested in them. Alternatively, let me know about any books that you've picked up recently. I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks.